Thank you for joining us today at the Three Rivers Venture Fair for our final program, the Keynote Speaker's Address. The University Technology Showcase earlier today gave you a sneak peek at the groundbreaking advancements that could develop into tomorrow's most celebrated technology ventures coming out of our universities. I wanted to take a moment to thank the judges that asked all the tough questions: Kalani Cook, Ilana Diamond, Afshan Khan, and Patrick Morand. I would also like to thank the universities that participated and the university representatives that pull this all together. Reed McManigal from Carnegie Mellon University and Paul Petrovich from the University of Pittsburgh. We also wanted to thank the sponsors, Cohen & Company, Cozen O'Connor, Carnegie Mellon University, and the University of Pittsburgh for their generous contributions to allow this program to happen. As you all know, it takes a village to put together an event of this magnitude. With that said, we would like to thank everyone for all of their assistance in making this happen. This includes our sponsors, our committee members, our universities, our entrepreneurs, our investors, and you, our attendees. A special thanks to the following people: our event co-chairs, Mike Stubler and Kelly Shako. Our committee chairs, Joe Slezak headed up our ambassador committee, Joe Slezak and Ian Shako, who oversaw the marketing and media committees. Jeremy Garvey once again took the lead on the Venture Connection Selection Committee. Rich Lunek and Gary Glosser took on the Investor Relations Committee. And last, but certainly not least, the Tykes team who handled the back end of all of this. Ian Shako, Jordan Tarr, Andrea Toth, Michael Whitfield, Daniel Liss, Debbie Hunkley, and the voice of the Three Rivers Venture Fair, me, Evan Shako. Thank you to all of our panelists, moderators, speakers, and everyone who helped make this event possible. Without further ado, I would now like to introduce Myah Irick of the Irick Group, Merrill Private Wealth Management, who will be today's moderator and will introduce our esteemed keynote speaker.
Thank you so much and welcome to the Three Rivers Venture Fair. We couldn't be more excited to have the incredible Sid Jawahar here with us today. We all feel very fortunate that he agreed to be our keynote speaker. We thought that it would be a little bit more engaging and interesting if instead we had a fireside chat with Sid. So we wanted to thank everyone in advance who sent in questions, and we're going to be having this discussion with Sid. We're going to infuse the questions that you asked, and we hope that you have several key takeaways from this afternoon's discussion. So first, I wanted to welcome Sid to the conversation, and I wanted to share a bit of background about Sid for those of you that didn't have the opportunity to read his full bio. So Sid is the chairman of the SwiftArt Group, which focuses on the consumer industry across different geographies and life cycles. He founded SwiftArt Ventures along with two other co-founders to offer exposure to promising early and growth stage consumer companies in the US. He started his career at Morgan Stanley and spent time in the firm's Hong Kong, Singapore, and New York offices, focusing on deal execution across various products and geographies. So over the years, Sid has advised and invested in several consumer and consumer-related companies. You know, when I first met Sid, one of the key things that stood out to me was really his moral compass and the conversation that we had. He grew up in India and moved here in his teens to attend college. And throughout his journey, he's found ways to really truly lift others up. And so this is, you know, if you think about somebody in the venture capital space, this is a little bit different, right? If this is the key thing that I remembered. Sid has really been focused on several key philanthropic areas, which range from developing educational and after-school programs in challenging neighborhoods to helping integrate art and science learning in these specific inner city types of environments. You know, most notably, he served on the board of directors for the Andy Roddick Foundation, which specializes in summer and after school programs. So again, welcome Sid, and thank you for joining us. You know, I really want to start off. I wanted to
that was a warm introduction. I don't know I deserve all of that, but thank you.
Well, actually, your bio was a lot longer, and I condensed it to something smaller, which, you know, I'm sure if somebody really wants to read about your background, they can, because you're incredible.
Thank you.
I actually feel that I wish I had met you much earlier in my career, because I'm sure you could have guided me accordingly through different key conversations. But nevertheless, here we are. And can we start off by you sharing something about your background that maybe isn't on your bio?
Ooh, Maya always asks the best questions. Thank you for that warm introduction, Maya, and the entire team for having me speak. I know it's a bit of an unusual time that we are living in, so I'm excited that we can actually talk about some subjects and topics of interest and relevance to us. The great city of Pittsburgh has been very kind to us this year, and so excited to be a part of the fabric of the investment community as well. My background, I've been around some eclectic people. I'd say that whenever, if ever, there's a book worth writing, it'll probably be called something like The Motley Crew or something of that something of that extent. I had met some incredible people early on in my life that had a pretty profound impact in my development. John Nash at Princeton University, we did a couple of research projects, and just the pure cerebral ability of what human potential can achieve when you extend yourself. Even with all of his physical, inabilities and issues, just a genius mind that I had a chance to work alongside for at least a brief while early on. I think was a useful tip. And the rest of it just kind of followed. Have had the fun pleasure of being with some incredible people that have all been in many of their domains high achieving, and I find that one or two things are similar in each of their life patterns. They are open to multiple opportunities. They're not looking at one answer for any question, whether that was a former president or somebody on a TV show, or Madam Speaker Pelosi, who I got to meet at the LBJ Awards in DC. And not allowed to say this, but we may or may not have had a martini together. And so, along the journey, I think I've just been very impressed with human tenacity, the capacity of each of these high achievers in their particular domains to go out and achieve whatever it is they set their mind out to doing. And the initial answer is rarely ever the one they go with. So I think my bio doesn't encapsulate that learning that I've certainly kept within the core of my thinking. And so I think it's been a fun ride and meeting great folks like yourself.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think that's really interesting that you mentioned, meeting all these people with eclectic backgrounds and how that's impacted your life. But you also said, this key word, tenacity. And you've had this incredible journey and you faced adversity along the way, some which you've shared with me and some that I've heard about from others, right? Yet you still continue to change lives through your work every day. So today we have entrepreneurs and investors tuned in. Can you share with us the inflection point or maybe the moment when you realized that your calling was the venture space and bringing together these entrepreneurs and investors?
Yeah, no, there were I think two moments in time for me. One in particular was that just being around founders, I realized that there's that sort of independent spirit, that anti-establishment thought that I welcomed. I've known to be a contrarian in many of my thinkings before, and there's a right way to do it, there's a wrong way to do it, and then there's your way to do it, right? Which usually is more right than wrong, but it typically has its own parameters and maximas and minimas. And so I think, in my journey itself, I was around emerging markets early in life. Growing up, I saw, for example, the first multinational restaurant company to establish itself in New Delhi, which is where I grew up in 1996. I still remember it was about, I'd say less than a mile away. The first McDonald's in India was in New Delhi, and that's the only place we could go get Heinz ketchup. And that was my way of getting one sandwich and 12 bags of ketchup. And these little consumer-centric stories stick with you. Little did I know, many years down, I will be running an emerging markets investment firm. So I think some of those consumer-oriented and now consumer health-oriented learnings were planted early just by function of being where I was and just the velocity of life that was happening. And I think second is I met a couple of mentors over time, both of whom I'd been in business with. And we just I remember this moment that we were sitting and we said, are we going to do something or not? And each of us could be more different. We're separated in age by decades. You've met one of them, Kelly, and they've been very successful. And I think my hesitations in being an entrepreneur myself and starting the venture firm were taken away after I was comfortable bringing them on as partners. So the confidence that they placed in me, Frank Krasovic and Zohar Ziv, both of whom, one had fought in the Yom Kippur War, went on to run Decker's Outdoors, the makers of Uggs boots, amongst many things. Frank had been a lifelong career entrepreneur, taking companies public. So when you have industry validation coming and telling you that you might be onto something, but they ask you to do it your way, you get inspired and emboldened. And I think those were two phases of my life, the second of which happened only a couple of years ago. And that's when we committed that, we'll do it the right way. And with the right guidance and mentors, you can have the right platform as well as the right advisory network.
Well, you mentioned, so thank you for sharing that, but you mentioned that you just met these other founders a couple of years ago. And then this comment about, McDonald's and the ketchup package, which I think is fascinating, happened a long time ago. So there had to have been something in between that also made you come to this and make you realize that this was the way.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I had not, been raised around big corporations in the West. So that was a learning in life when I was servicing some of these clients as a banker and other roles that I had at Morgan Stanley. I realized that there was a lot of innovation that was just not happening at these firms. And the exciting stuff, the stuff that people wanted to talk about was happening, at different places. I still recall, living through the 08-09 crisis, which was my first crisis I'd lived through, which makes you a bit tougher for your second one. So the pandemic has not phased me quite as much. But I remember that shared economies was a new thing. Airbnb, Uber, all these companies were just being, coming into the foray. WhatsApp was becoming a big thing. And that's all people wanted to talk about. And then you had these industrials and metals and mining and consumer companies, cross-border acquisitions and transactions, where innovation was really truncated. And so I realized quickly and early in life that if you want to be a change agent or a change driver, sometimes you have to go where the major change is happening. Right. And so in my learnings and my journey, I joke about this, but I may as well, could easily have been a founder of a consumer startup. I decided to do this because this is where my talents were extended to. Bringing deals together, companies, people, ideas, and really being able to provide a launchpad for them. So I think just seeing that lack of innovation at big corporations, not to name any, I think it's just a function of size. And we're living in this unbelievable time with the information age and all the technology we have at our fingertips, that collaborative energies and learnings are so easy to disperse and cross-polarize that there really isn't an excuse for us to not solve where we are. And through the pandemic, we've learned that as well. But I'd say just as a journey, I can't think of one time when I had this aha moment, but I know that it dawned on me to a point where I couldn't do anything else but do what I do now. So.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. It also helps to think about how you originally answered one of my first questions, right? You said that what wasn't in your bio, you had the opportunity to meet all of these very eclectic people, but it's kind of allowed you to have this gradual and come to a gradual inflection point, we should say, to realize that this is the space you want to be in by having that discussion with your other co-founders. So thank you. So, you helped us get an understanding of how you grew as a leader. Now let's talk about the work that you're doing each and every day, right? Let's talk about Spark. As many of us know, research has shown that there are 4 key elements of any entrepreneurial venture: people, opportunity, context, and the deal. How do you assess if an opportunity is right? And then how do you rank those 4 key factors that I mentioned?
Yeah, I think, great question. I think, our number one criteria for investments is really the people. We'd really like to get into the psychology and the psyche and the culture, core values of the founder and the founding team. I think it starts there. And the second is every idea that we look at needs to be in either disruptive company or disruptive category. So I'd say, the deal aspect of it is the last. It's usually when everything else has come together. What were the other 3 criteria that you had mentioned?
I said the people, the context,
so people is number 1.
Right?
Yeah.
Opportunity and the deal.
Yeah, so I'd say the people is number 1.
Is the disruption.
Yeah. Opportunity is number 2, and context would be number 3. And there's a lot of use cases in our kind of purview now that we see. So, before the pandemic, we were not as involved in healthcare and telemedicine related companies and evolution. So when we looked at where we were and, we got a chance to kind of catch our breath in April after all of the stuff that had happened in March and really going into May, we said, we are in a moment of time, right? In that case, the context was critical because 10 to 12 years of legislation had happened in a matter of 5 months, 4 months. In healthcare, where a lot of things had passed that were typically barriers to telemedicine. And telemedicine is not just getting a consult via FaceTime. It's being able to do minimally invasive surgeries, providing telemedicine to remote parts of the world where there is no primary care. So there's multiple applications, but up till now, there really wasn't a catalyst. So in that case, I think the context was supremely important and the opportunity set was similar. We saw that the average daily visits per platform were increasing at a meteoric rate. And so we identified that to be a core focus area. We knew that, in another use case, it was people where we saw this new technology that was really honing in on UVC, ultraviolet C rays to be able to disinfect pathogens, including the COVID SARS-2 virus. And when you think about that particular technology, we really hadn't seen the proof of concept yet. We had a team that we really liked. The company's name is R0, and they were one of our call it first investments during the pandemic. And we liked what it could do, not just for the next 6 months or 12 months, but what it would do for the psyche of everybody trying to get back to normalcy. So I think healthcare cleaning and disinfecting technologies ended up being one of those things where it changes between people and context. And I think eventually you find opportunity and the deal between those first two, amongst that merging of interests. And we've been fortunate, I think, in that we've been around some really great people. The network that we have inherited and now grown brings, I think, high quality people to our forum. And the hardest thing, frankly, is just being able to say no, so we can focus our energies on the right people and the right context.
When you say it's hard to say no, what then really happens? How do you give the feedback to the entrepreneurs, and how candid are you with that feedback? And especially at a time, during COVID, I imagine, in the pandemic, everyone's really hurting for cash and for some infusion. So what are you saying to them?
Yeah, it's I'd say it's not a perfect science. It's somewhere between that artfulness and science. I joke with our team that I'd say that I'm more of a full-time therapist than a part-time CEO, because a lot of it is just being a good listener and trying to be creative and helpful. So I think empathy is where we begin, right? I think every entrepreneur's journey, nobody decides to be an entrepreneur because they want to lead a happy, cozy life right off the bat. It comes with incredible challenges, and even to the point where they get to our view, they've already been through so much. And so we've learned a great deal from deals we've passed on. We've continued to keep in touch with founders we haven't invested in for one reason or another. Excuse me. And the feedback normally is quite straightforward. It's for these reasons, and we do all of our work in companies that pass through our filters and our stages 1 and 2, and then eventually get to the third. But at that point, we put together a memo because we have done a fair bit of work on the company. We've looked at the financials. We're very much fundamentally driven. So we are looking at all kinds of things like market size. And usually there's constructive feedback. Either it's the supply chain is just not investable and we can help you with that, but under certain criteria, or this is a terrific hobby, or call it a small idea that's not necessarily venture backable or needs venture capital. And a third usually is that, look, here's some of the changes that we would recommend. If it works out, we'd love to continue the discussion. But for now, we're unfortunately going to have to pass. So it usually ends up, I think the more clear you are, the better. Our entire team, we joke about this, but our entire team, I think, has, over the course of the time we've been together, gotten better at saying yes or no early and faster. It makes us more efficient in our time. We get anywhere from 80 to 100 deals every quarter.
Wow.
That clearly we don't have either the investment appetite or the time to invest in. So, it ends up being close to 10 to 12 that we would seriously consider investing in on a quarterly basis across the different verticals. And we hope to invest in at least half of them once we elevate that to the investment committee. But it's interesting because everybody comes out of the woodworks and starts bringing you companies that their uncles, aunts, nieces, and nephews have been involved with, so we've gotten better at it, but I don't know if anyone ever gets perfectly good at it. I think it's just one of those work in progresses.
Yeah, no, I mean, 80 to 120 opportunities a quarter. I mean, that's pretty significant. So are you seeing, or maybe you haven't had enough time yet, are you seeing some of these companies take your suggestions, revamp, and then come back to you?
Yeah, I'd say 15% we never hear from again, which is what it is. I'd say about 25 to 40% roughly take our suggestions, and I think they learned that from our process, we're fairly straightforward. We're all coming at it from a point of trying to help. Constructive feedback is only for their benefit. And then I'd say about 30 to 40% of them, the remainder, the balance, continue on their paths. And in our time, we haven't seen too many implosions yet, but we've been glad that we passed on several companies that we thought were not ready. Some became COVID casualties as the frame has become, and regrettably, right, they were interesting companies, but for one reason or another, we decided to pass. And now I think with the pandemic, we're being quite deliberate, so we're getting pretty good about saying yes or no early. So there are certain categories that we really do think there will be breathtaking innovation and disruptive technologies coming out of that. And there are other areas where we think that this will be kind of a non-catalytic category, and we've taken a back seat. So we're very interested in women's health. We're very interested in the lactation company that I mentioned to you. We're looking at some others in that category. We're looking at beauty and fashion, but not from a contemporary standpoint. Organic, earthy materials that are substantively different from some companies. We realize that dermatology as a practice has an under-penetration to telemedicine because people have the notion that most of the interactions are invasive, and it turns out that about half to 70% are not invasive. They're pre-op, post-ops, et cetera. So we're creating a focus within our firm to have a teledermatology practice. And that's all been a learning, right? We talk to so many people, we are always collecting feedback. And even to friends, I mean, just being able to say, listen, we're over-indexed on companies this quarter. We'd love to take a look at it next quarter. It's not always the easiest conversation to have, but I've learned humbly that the more direct you can be, the better in the long term.
No, I think that's helpful, and it's probably very helpful to the entrepreneur. But I wanted to go back to when we were talking about ranking those 4 key factors, and you keep emphasizing, and you continue to emphasize the word, the term people as being a huge influence point of how you guys invest and look investing. What happens if the deal or the opportunity doesn't look quite right, but you recognize and notice like an entrepreneur that's just amazing? Like, how do you stay engaged with them? Have you ever introduced them to a different project? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's tricky, because people that are, that has happened. It's happened painfully more often than you would expect, because incredibly smart people are sometimes just backing the wrong idea or have convinced themselves that this will be their next big thing. And we've all heard so many times that, second, third, fourth time founders typically have learned from the mistakes of the past, yet you have very successful first time founders. So how do you distinguish between those two? I think, incredible talent eventually also has to be humble. And so if you have the learner's mentality and, with great knowledge, I think comes great humility. Sometimes that memo gets missed and, we are quick to pass on those opportunities. But if the founder or the founding team or the leadership is exhibiting humility to us and they recognize that there's a fair bit of experience on our bench, which then is being translated into feedback, they're usually receptive of that. Now, every once in a while, our suggestion will be that, love your energy. I think we want to back you, but this may not be the right idea for us. And, they're so razor focused on the particular task at hand that the conversation kind of dies there. Other times, if there's an individual connection, and typically that's what happens, if you've developed a one-on-one rapport with somebody that you've gotten to know at a deeper level beyond just the deal, and that's kind of how we like to do it, then we remain in contact with them. And I'd say there are about 12 to 24 people that I've met in the past 16 months that I would love to follow. One in particular was a famous actor's son who the tragedy of the father was that the life was taken in a suicide, and mental health awareness was an issue. And this is an actor that I'd admired growing up, and we've all seen many of his movies and things like that. And I loved his energy, and I didn't think that we as a firm didn't think that the idea was going to translate. And so we've continued keeping in touch with them, and we didn't want to invest in the company for the wrong reasons. And I have a strong suspicion that we'll end up doing some business with them, just because I know that the gravity of where that energy comes from, combined with all that smarts that the person has been able to accumulate, will lead to good outcomes in the field of mental health and awareness. And so we remain open to those discussions. And I think the craftiest, most successful people over time tell a good story. There's a reason for it, because they've known what to eliminate, what to use. And we like storytellers. We like people that are factual, but also are able to tell fascinating stories. And if it relates back to their past and their journey, I think the gravity of the investment to us goes up infinitely.
As it will to everyone else, the consumers, right? The broader community, they're going to see that same value that you do. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
We've talked about it. 2020 has been a surreal year for many of us. from the economy to the pandemic to the racial injustice, and now the election that's next week. What is your team doing to adapt, and what recommendations do you have for investors and also for entrepreneurs this year?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I think the first thing is communication. If you ask me, what's the one thing that we have been able to do or that we wish we had done sooner, but this pandemic really did for us, I think we became better communicators internally and externally. I think with everything that was happening on the social unrest and the social inequality side, we never ran away from those discussions. We were forthcoming in having those with our team, with our stakeholders. We were forthcoming in writing whatever editorials we felt like were the right thoughts and feelings of the firm. And I think that's the big one. I think if there's all of the things you mentioned, right, it all leads to one word: uncertainty. Uncertainty causes anxiety, and anxiety eventually leads to outcomes that you weren't always expecting. But I think while we cannot control some of these events, right, many of those events, we can be a positive voice. So, little things that when we knew that it was the national election time, we changed our offsite to accommodate that. So I'm not holding anybody, at gunpoint and saying you must go vote, but the general direction is that let's be active members of our democracy. I think it's an important piece of it. When the Black Lives Matter movement was in its call it peak, we had members of our team that I'm sure had so much call it intense feeling inside of them, and we allowed them to discuss that with us. We learned a great deal from it. The members that were African American, I think those kinds of discussions are useful. And look, you're only as good as your communication within your team and externally. So I think as we are adapting and changing and challenging, my primary goal and focus is oftentimes being providing resources to our team. So whether it be talking to more people, getting an informed opinion, the election is a two outcome game, right? A or B will happen in either situation. I think nobody can steal away the sense of true innovation and entrepreneurial spirit that the country just has in general. Well, some may argue otherwise, but I obviously feel that is pure, and it's, for better or worse, linked to human capacity and tenacity. And secondly, it's like, listen, whatever happens, we'll be okay. It sounds very simple, but I think, we have our Wednesday evening all hands, and a lot of what my goal in those calls is to provide a brief state of the union with our firm, but just to let everybody know that while we have our challenges, both on the macroeconomic side as well as the political side, we'll be okay. Let's keep our chin up, do things the right way. And I think people feel a sense of pride in being able to, talk about stuff like that. So I encourage everybody to do that. I think people are overly political these days, and it's difficult for them to mention how they feel about certain things, but I think your team deserves to know. And I think I've always encouraged it.
No, I think that's great feedback for entrepreneurs, right? Focus on the communication, preparing yourself for uncertainty, things of that nature, which can partly fuse over, I guess, to how advice you would give for investors. But let's get a little bit more pointed for the investors.
Yeah.
What should they be looking at, in 2020? How should they be looking at deals as it relates to all this uncertainty? Any advice you would give them?
Yeah, I think, being selective right now, I think is a great time to deploy capital. I've said that since the beginning of the pandemic. Any crisis typically provides a terrific opportunity to place capital on undervalued assets. The asset class depends upon which ones, the investor is participating in. Public markets obviously have had a giant recovery already. And so I'd be careful in getting into that unless you knew which pockets you were playing. On the growth equity side, which is sort of the middle market side, there's a lot of consolidation. We are, in our position, are seeing some buyout opportunities in the skincare as well as the cosmetics space, which we think would be a great time to get involved with some of these companies. And on the venture side, I think just being present, right? Like I think the consumer is not stupid, right? So just because over the past 4 months, people are sitting at home more than anything else and were, buying a lot of things on e-commerce doesn't mean that behavior pattern will continue into perpetuity. So not losing sign of or some sense of that fundamental reason as to why a product in a category was fitting, I think that's critical. Being surgical with one's time. I think, there's a lot of companies out there that need help and support. A few that I know try to help the restaurant industry, people working for all. And I think you have to be deliberate in getting into those spaces. And I think over time, the investment community will figure it out. On the venture side, we are seeing a massive number of deals. So I don't know if deal flow slowed down. I think we're not as quick to jump on one because we think the pandemic led to a rapid increase in sales. Same thing with telemedicine. I mean, the daily visits were obviously going to rise when there's no other option, but eventually the daily visits will taper off, and high quality telemedicine is what will stick. Same thing with e-commerce brands. High quality e-commerce interchange will stick, and just to keep one's eyes and ears open and present, and not lose sight of where we are today. The here and now is important as we get back to whatever version of normalcy, whenever it is we do. I think consumer patterns and behaviors have a way of regenerating themselves.
So you started actually touching on this a little bit. Let's just go a little bit deeper here. You know, with the market volatility and the quick changes just in the last year alone, what other key investment themes are you seeing emerging? You talked about some of the health and telemedicine.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, you know, in terms of financing, there's been a robust, as you know, explosion of SPACs, special purpose acquisitions, or facilities. And I think with SPACs, you have created an alternative route to IPOs that traditionally would have to be overly structured and have all the regulatory outcomes. We have seen certain venture-backed deals now exiting through SPACs. So that has been a key development, I think, certainly over the past 2 years, but much more so over the past 6 to 9 months. Everybody seems to have a SPAC idea. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically raising a bunch of capital for a blank check company with a seasoned operating team with the view of buying a company and operating it within the next 24 months. So that's been an interesting development. In terms of where we see opportunity on industries, I think healthcare is a massive industry. I see there being vast amounts of opportunity across almost every perceivable vertical. So as you are now forcing a variety of technology onto an industry, you are going to see integration issues. You have three primary participants in the healthcare equation. You have the plans, the providers, and the patients. And if everything is going to reduce costs while improving patient outcomes, then the system will, in the near term, go through an overload. So from the integration, there's going to be a variety of opportunities. In particular, within healthcare, we like the CAP space, which is a sort of a more core administrative and processing side of healthcare. We think delivery within healthcare is obviously going to change, but within that will come a variety of blockchain and artificial intelligence inclusions. We looked at a company that was in the pharmacy space that was going to help the efficiency around prior authorizations. So getting deeper, I think, you notice within these buckets, we start seeing multi-billion-dollar opportunities, and we just don't know which ones will be the ones that'll get there faster. But we're big in consumer health. I think what this pandemic will do, this may be our generation's Vietnam War. It'll take us a long time to fully recover from the psychological effects of it. Mental health and wellness is a big area for us. We've looked at least a few companies that we've come pretty close to investing in a significant way. So I think everything around health, wellness, consumer health, we're pretty excited about. E-commerce as a delivery model, I think, has obviously been heightened. Outside of grocery stores and pharmacies, there was little availability till recently. So distribution channels matter. There's a reason for that. And then again, technology has always played a good role and an important role in all of this. I'm not here to make any stock suggestions or any of that, but I know that I remain a long-term bull on certain technology plays that I think have become mini economies within themselves. So if you have what we call a bellwether company that you think is lifting and sometimes rising an entire sea of boats, and the rising tide will lift all of them, then it's sometimes good to play the bellwether because then you get so much learnings from it. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
no, I mean, it did.
Without my compliance department telling me that I should be providing investment advice.
I understand about compliance.
Yes.
So any other trends you're seeing in the health and wellness space specifically, because this is what you're directly investing in, or at least you're more, you're honed in and focused on now, that you wanted to share beyond those?
Yeah, I think, we talked a bit about women's health. That's a key area of interest for me personally, as well as for the firm. I think it's been historically not one that has been highlighted as much.
Why?
So for
that is?
I think it's been stigmatized. I mean, I was talking to some of our team members earlier today, and when it comes to the journey of women's health, right from call it right after puberty all the way to the menopause phase of the journey, there isn't a mainstream brand today that we can associate, with the women's health side of any one of those verticals. Whereas on the men's health side, you think about any of those life cycles, you have erectile dysfunction commercials every night on television, and you don't have anything for the females. And it's not that that's not an important focus area. I think it's just been a forgotten focus area. We talked to some of our friends at P&G, and it turns out that everyone is waking up to this reality now. I think people were not identifying that to be a significant part of their focus. I mean, we were talking about lactation, for example, and there are very few brands out there that are focused on women's lactation, whether it be superfoods, organic, inorganic, prebiotics, postbiotics on a nutrition industry category. I mean, that to me is just sitting there to be disrupted. Unlike many other categories, I think women's health over the next 10 years will proliferate, and it'll be a multi-billion-dollar category. We hope to participate in a meaningful way. We've looked at a variety of deals, but I always say that the companies that get it right are not just thinking about one product. They're usually trying to follow the journey of the consumer. And the learnings that come from there are significant. And so I'd say women's health is a big focus area. And for the interest of our discussion, if I was to focus on just one so it can be emphasized fully, I would say women's health would be my number one chosen area of interest for healthcare in general.
No, that's great. I mean, thank you for sharing that. As a woman, I clearly know exactly what you're talking about. But this was one of the things that was very interesting to me in our initial conversation when I first met you, because you were so tuned in on this issue, and you almost seem like a subject matter expert, which is fascinating considering, clearly you're from what you shared, you're not a woman. Can you tell me, just with 20?
It's amazing how many books on lactation.
I'm sure if we weren't live, that part would be edited out. But can you tell me, from your perspective, has the definition of disruption evolved or changed, especially, given this year? And how should entrepreneurs adapt with that being in mind? And what should investors, be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I think the word disruptive, I think, has been redefined. I think disruptive earlier meant anything that was making exponential change, not just incremental. So you had two particular patterns. You had linear, which was percentage year over year, and then you had exponential year over year. And the latter was easily put in the disruptive category, even though it was probably merely accumulating market share. I think disruptive, as we look at it, is happening in two different categories. One is at the company level. And the company level disruption we are seeing is companies that are making very bold and call it substantive measures and claims. So I think one is that, look, we are living with the COVID pathogen and its various mutations now for the next however many months and years. All right, well, there will eventually be a technology that goes into disinfecting this, right? There will be a virus killer in the vaccine world. And so when somebody says, look, if we want to be the lead certification equivalent of UV disinfecting, to me, that's a bold and disruptive idea, right? We're not just trying to find the Ubers of this and the Airbnbs of that anymore. We're trying to be disruptive within the new normal. Within categories, as I mentioned, women's health is a big one. You have category creators, which is disruptive in its own self. So when there isn't a category, the return to work category is being created. It'll probably get overly populated, and then there'll be a cleansing of that. But I think the definition of industry and category creators is a fascinating one. The new normal will mean that people's focus on their own mental health and wellness will go up dramatically. So what you will start seeing is people getting much, much more regimented about that, just as you would about skincare, just as you would about other aspects of your development and overall functioning. I think we are going to start seeing a lot more of that, and companies will incorporate that in their general program. Obviously, we wait to see how everything comes together, but I think the company disruption will happen with big ideas now. It will not happen with smaller ideas, because eventually we will realize that those were revenue aggregators and they were not disruptive ideas. I think the disruptive ideas will be very clear cut. Right? I'm waiting to see some disruptive ideas coming out that are focused on the restaurant, food and beverage space. They're there. They just haven't been, they're percolating. We've heard of a couple, they were almost there, but not fully there. I think some are trying to transition to delivery only and things like that. But that old saying, the necessity is the mother of all creation or some version of that. I think we'll start seeing that more and more. And on the category side, I think while the definition of category creators has always stayed similar, I think category disruptors now will change. People are going to be much, much more specific in terms of consumer behavior and consumer health behavior and where they're buying, what they're buying, and what that eventually does for them.
So wouldn't you say, especially in the health and wellness space, if you talk about this disruption being big, and you gave the example of, almost like something being able to kill or disinfectant completely, I guess, killing the virus, isn't there a lot more liability with a big disruptor like that? How do you vet that? I mean, how do you, in those 4 key factors that I mentioned, like how do you weight that liability?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. You have product matter experts, subject matter experts that exist for almost all of these technologies that are out there. We talk about UVC, that particular technology has been around for a long time, 80 plus years. It's been used in medical grade facilities to disinfect operation theaters and other sensitive areas. It normally would not be conducive for human interaction when those were happening, and typically would be the efficacy of that would be high enough to where it could cause skin damage. So now what we're doing is we're taking a bunch of these different things that exist, and what we did, for example, is we talked to some people that we thought were pure, UVC experts. And so you cannot be a master in everything, but I think being a liaison with somebody who is a subject matter expert, I think has been our go-to. We like to pull in a lot of resources. So for the company that I was mentioning earlier, the pharmacy space, which is solving for prior authorizations, we brought in a clinician, we brought in some people that were in that world from the peers side of things. And eventually we got what I think was a true value-oriented answer. And we make our own judgment, right? Industry participants usually have predisposed biases as well. So I think what our process is that if there's truly something disruptive happening, let's go verify that the science is in fact all there. There's been enough examples, right, in the near or the recent past that we've all heard about, and we don't want to make those mistakes. So to the extent you can, you try and verify that the science is what it is, and the people typically, if they come through the network, there's one extra level of trust that goes with that. And when they think about product categories and they think about market sizing, we really get into those numbers with them. When it comes down to CAC and LTV and churn and what the lifetime value would be for that particular user and customer for that company over time, these are metrics we are very, very, very much in tune with. So we end up knowing, as much as we can, if not as much as we can, about the company as a founding team. What we lack is the tenacity that they have, right? We don't have that in each one of our companies because we have to have that as a platform. So when you take all of that, you try and lean on experts to the extent you can. I was jokingly mentioning this, but I was being half serious that if you're going to invest in a category, the joke's on you if you don't read up on it obsessively, right? So when we were looking at women's health, I've been reading a lot about it, and it's been eye-opening for me, right? So that's an example where there's a lot of information out there. I emailed one of the leading professors in telemedicine. His name is Dr. Ateeb Mehrotra, who's a practicing physician, as well as a leading telemedicine researcher on all things legislation. I emailed 5 professors. 2 of them emailed me back. One of them is going to join our advisory board, and he's at Harvard. And I will never know more about telemedicine legislation than him. But it didn't also take me enormous amounts of effort and energy to send out those 5 emails to get that data point.
Right.
And I think my humble advice to other venture firms is do the same. There's so much knowledge out there to be packaged, waiting to be harnessed. The best partners, long-term financial partners, are the ones that I think understand truly the business side of things. And why bail on that fiduciary duty for our investors, employees, and eventually companies.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. It goes back to the very beginning where you mentioned, something that wasn't in your bio. It's having the opportunity to meet all these eclectic people. But I think part of that is you as a leader, you're constantly looking for ways to challenge yourself, get out of your comfort zone, and meet people that don't share the same thought process as you or same expertise as you. And I think that that's incredibly valuable to have, and to have that skill set and that you seek that out. So.
Thank you. And I'm supported by an incredible cohort of young men and women that helped me in that journey. We're trying to balance that men and women mix as well as we go through our next phase of development. But I feel blessed. I think to lead is an enormous opportunity, but it's also a privilege. So I learn from them as much as they learn from me, I hope.
And it's almost like you led me right back to this next question that I wanted to talk to you about, Let's go back to the racial injustice that I referenced before. In 2020, many things that have been going on for years, in particular in the Black community, have really been spotlighted this year in particular. In addition, we've seen a record number of women step out of the workforce in large numbers so their families can thrive and survive. And it's not a secret that the VC space has been lacking diversity. And it's also not a secret that this is the question that many leaders dodge and don't want to talk about when it comes to the venture capital space. I know that you and your team have really looked at being part of this solution. And can you share with us more about that?
Yeah, no, and we've talked about this, and I always say that, let's not be scared to go anywhere, right? If it's part of the discussion, it's part of our thought process, it ought to be part of the conversation. I think of our development, I think like any other VC firms, as a development of the neural networks. In the first wave of development, you have, a founder supported by maybe a partner or two or co-founders. You build on that, right? You don't have the luxury of picking and choosing. And I've upset people when I've said this in the past, because why did you not go make that extra effort in that time? And I regret not doing it. But in that first neural network wave, you build on the existing platforms you have, because that's all you have the luxury to do. And unfortunately, what happens is your extension, your second wave of networks look a lot like your first wave of networks, because that's what people do, right? And so you get to a certain point when, if you are a critical mass, you take a look and you look at your roster and you're saying, well, we've got, X figured out, and that's great. We are a diverse-led firm, but we are under-indexed on female participation, and that was never a deliberate point, right? But I was happy that we've stumbled on that, and we are now deliberately fixing that, and we have enlisted a lot of very, very strong females as help, including yourself, that are enabling us to have that discussion, right? So we need one at the top that people can actually aspire to. Then we start creating a recruiting channel for the junior talent as well. So a lot of our energies is now focused. We've got one African-American partner who will be joining us. We've got a female partner that'll be joining us. So strides in the right direction. But I think our story is very similar to a lot of other VC firms, where, from the outside looking in, it's easy to make those judgments, but unless they've been around for 30 years, in which case their problems might even be more fundamental, I think you end up building upon what you do. So we're fairly diverse. I think more than half our team is a minority background. That was probably a function of me being of minority background, right? So that was not a coincidence that we attracted that kind of talent and retained that level of energy. And now we're deliberately making strides to fixing the gender imbalance, where we would like to bring in a lot more females to, I think it'll make for a better participatory panel. We'll make better decisions, and it won't happen overnight, but we've set up our goal that in the next 3 odd years, we'd like our firm to be 50-50. And if we can achieve that, and I'm hoping we will, we'd have made a stride in the right direction. And I think, the venture firms that are being formed now, the talent that is now creating this wave of energy and change, I think I'm not alone when I say that a lot of us genuinely and deliberately care. It's just sometimes, we're handicapped by things, and we're now learning how to, kind of uncuff ourselves and be more and more bold, as I mentioned. And I think as leaders, it's our responsibility to do that. I'm not afraid to hold myself accountable. So we make bold promises to our team, and so far we've been able to keep most, if not all of them. So I know they'll be listening and watching this, and they'll know that in 3 years we ought to be gender divided by at least half and half, and be inclusive. And diversity and inclusion makes for better investment outcomes, no question about it.
Yeah, and if you don't remember, in a couple of years, I'll send you the transcript of this discussion. As one of my
I know you will.
I'll be your accountability partner. But you touched on this, right? Yep. BCG, McKinsey, year after year, reports are showing that diverse teams perform better, and companies that are embracing this continue to outperform their peers. So how do you see this manifesting in the venture world, in particular with entrepreneurs? So when they come to you looking for an investment, are you asking about their leadership team and diversity and inclusion from that standpoint?
Yes, we are. And, it's interesting. We had this discussion earlier, and I truly believe this. If your core values are aligned with your investment objectives, which are aligned with your management style, everything just flows better. So, the fact that we are focusing some of our energies on women's health makes it easier for us to attract some incredible talent, because the last thing you want is a bunch of dudes making decisions on women's health companies. right?
Right.
That's not how this works. But then you align that with the diversity and inclusion piece, and then you align that with the core values that we have. I think we have a better shot. So if we were, say, focusing on an industry that was very, very represented, fully represented by men and not as many women, and we were trying to attract female talent for that, it would have been harder. But I think what we're doing is we are creating pods of energy and activity that are relevant to one another. And look, my story, I maybe when you asked me what's the part that got highlighted or didn't get highlighted, I grew up around very strong females. I've this feeling of feminism has not been an overnight phenomenon. I've strongly held this notion that women-led companies often have better outcomes, and particularly the third world, when you have the developing world with microfinance and other examples. And so this isn't a new concept for me. My grandmother, who lived with us when I was a young kid, had cancer. She fought it her whole life and did it with the most optimistic attitude. So, I'm not afraid to tell that story when I'm trying to engage with more females, because that's the part they need to hear, right? That a lot of us have those tensions. We just haven't brought it out to the forefront. Zohar, one of my co-founders, talks about how the two strongest women in his life are his mother and his wife. And his wife debates the order of that, but this is somebody who literally was raised by by his mother and had made some difficult life choices. And I think sometimes we get so comfortable in the webbings of our day-to-days that we forget that that's the stuff that makes us who we are. And when you're trying to bring in talent and being the most authentic, genuine voice, you want to bring that out. You want to bring out the fact that we're not just saying this because it's the right thing to say, or we'll be making more profitable investments in women's health. I think the narrative is that this matters. It matters to us. It matters to me at a personal level, at a firm level, and we're trying to, with good stakeholders like yourself, we're trying to make the right strides. But I think it's deliberately forced us to be introspective. And I've gotten, and I say this with humility, I've gotten better at creating that as a core agenda and actually executing on that agenda than maybe I had done in the years past.
I mean, and that's what we need, right? Authentic leaders like you that are being so intentional and holding their teams accountable to be just as intentional from whatever seat they're at. I mean, that's the key. And I think that's probably what's going to allow there to be change in the venture world, and from the investors and the entrepreneur side, kind of demanding this type of behavior, this intentionality. So thank you for sharing that. As we start to wrap up, I really want to focus on the conversation on Pittsburgh. We have a thriving community here, even amidst everything that's happened in 2020. And you've been very active with your work in the healthcare space and also with Carnegie Mellon. What are your thoughts on the opportunities that are here locally, and what can be done here in the region to really force us to think outside of the box?
Yeah, no, I've had a very, very privileged and fortunate introduction to Pittsburgh with great folks like yourself and Kelly and some others. One of my partners is contemporaries, Jim Rohr, who ran PNC Bank as its chairman and CEO for several years, is now part of our advisory team. And so we've been blessed. I would say that our introduction was warm to begin with. And what we've noticed in our time, and I've been to Pittsburgh this year maybe 8 times.
Wow.
I think when we were having dinner or lunch with Kelly, and I knew a couple of people in the room, which would not be the case a year ago. And so Pittsburgh, I think it reminds me a bit of some of these other cities that I've done some work in, like Austin, like Cleveland, where there is a tremendous amount of energy, intellect, and capital. It is just maybe a bit less visible than the New Yorks, Bostons, and Chicagos. Through Jim and through some of the great folks at Carnegie Mellon, we have seen some of the incredible work that they're doing. They've done an amazing job of packaging some of that in their Center for Entrepreneurship. Michael McQuaid, who's their VP of Research, has done a great job of showing us as much as they have on what all we can do with their portfolio of investments. And then when I remember we were having coffee at Starbucks, and he asked me, he goes, "What's the moonshot? What do you want to do with the university?" And I said, without batting an eyelid, I said, one day, how cool would it be if we Center for Advanced Carnegie Mellon, or UMKC, any one of the universities that we're doing some great work with. And I think we are beginning to see some really, really great potential in Pittsburgh, both on the innovation side with the universities, on the entrepreneurship side. We have 2 companies currently in our pipeline. One is in the AI space, the other is in the healthcare space, that are from the Pittsburgh area. And the third is in the investment community. We've met incredible folks that are maybe a little bit less, I wouldn't say they're quiet, but they're less loud than the New York, LA, based investors,
It's
but
the
they're
humility
so
you
willing and
referenced
able to
before.
collaborate that in the past. Yeah, I think that's key. I think Pittsburgh's got that fighting tenacity about it. It's, been through its own sets of ups and downs, even when the Steelers are not doing well. And I've met some great people. We're looking at a skincare brand that we really like, that the family is based in Pittsburgh. We've met a couple of really, really smart and enterprising entrepreneurs, a couple of whom have become dear friends of ours. So I feel really good about the city and what it's doing, even in the technology that I've been introduced to over the past 8 months. I mean, it's been pretty cool to see all the cool things that are coming out of it. And I think the next step is the fun one, is the challenging one as well, is how do you merge those interests? How do you take what is available in the investment community? We must have met now about 5 or 6 family offices that were all plugged in with one another, but not so much with, say, the university. How do you take that and you combine it with that to that, right? So I think having more of these kinds of forums is helpful. Must have met a dozen entrepreneurs at least, and from the Pittsburgh area, all of whom have been extraordinarily impressive. So the future for Pittsburgh looks bright.
That's really encouraging. So thank you for sharing those sentiments. Do you have any final pieces of advice for our entrepreneurs tuning in and also our investors tuning in?
Yeah, I think, listen, these are interesting, difficult times. I've been forced to deliberate more, but I think, when you wake up in the morning, you have to be deliberate. It doesn't substitute thoughtfulness. You have to be thoughtful and deliberate, but I think this is a time to make your voice heard. Having a voice is critical. Having an opinion is important. Having an informed opinion is vastly important. And then knowing that whatever we do in these next few days, weeks, and months may end up impacting our lives in a deeper way, just like the past few months have. So, hang in there is my main message. Whatever happens will be okay. And tenacity, grit, and networks and support, all of it comes and goes in small doses. And as long as we wake up every morning to do our best, I think the world is still and remains to be our oyster.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for the incredible discussion and for always being so candid. And also with our audience, because I know that they're going to find great value in a lot of the key takeaways that you shared. If somebody wanted to continue to stay engaged with you, what is the best way to do that, or at least follow the work from your group?
Yeah, we have all kinds of things. So Fridays, we send out our summary thoughts in a research email. I encourage people to email us at research@swiftarcventures.com. We are easily reachable, small team. If you have an investment idea that you'd like to pitch to us, email us at contact@swiftarcventures.com. The advantage of small teams is I don't really miss too much. So depending on inbound inquiries and energy levels and things like that, we have resources that we can allocate to different use cases. And Kelly knows how to get a hold of me. I know you know how to get a hold of me. So I'm an email away for anything I can be of help with.
No, thank you, Sid. And, once again, we'd like to thank our sponsors who made this entire program possible, especially this last keynote session with Sid, as well as our committee members, speakers, entrepreneurs, investors, and everyone who participated by attending. We know that this has been a very surreal year, and we hope that next year we'll see all of you in person. We hope you enjoyed this year's virtual Three Rivers Venture Fair, and we wish you good health and safety. See you next year. Thank you.